Alright, today's question is, how was enlightened absolutism different from regular absolutism? Was it a success or a failure, and why? Well, enlightened absolutism is basically taking the ideas of the Enlightenment movement, for example, free speech, religious toleration, right to property, and pursuit of happiness, and trying to apply it to an absolutist ruler. Basically, many intellectuals thought that the rulers would be the best way to actually get these intellectual movements passed through the system. So, working with the government of the time to get all of these ideas passed and followed through. How is that different from absolutism? Well, with enlightened absolutism, they're giving the people rights, and hopefully those rights would strengthen the state in one fashion or another. Greater income, greater influence, and less chaos at home. That's the attempt. Now, success or failure of these movements varies all over Europe. So, intellectuals would go to these rulers, people in England, France, as well as in Prussia, Austria, and Russia. They would try to convince these rulers that it would be beneficial if people had the rights to own property, have religious toleration, free speech, and so on and so forth. So first I'll start off with France. Basically, the French monarchs were not open to or really followed any of the Enlightened movements, even though France was one of the main advocates and where much of the intellectual activity was going on for the Enlightenment movement. The monarchs really separate themselves from that. And so what happened was essentially nothing as far as an absolutism taking on roles in enlightenment ever happened. Um, but the Enlightenment movement is going to take hold after the American Revolutionary War occurs. But we look at this phase in the French Revolution, so I'll leave that to another time. But more or less in France, it failed epically. As far as Britain is concerned, you don't have an absolutist ruler in England in the first place. In England, it was also one of the other major hubs of the Enlightenment movement. And in England, it already had a separation of powers. You had the Parliament, which was separated into two houses, the House of Lords and the House of Commons, and then you had a king. Now, after the William of Orange and his family came in, quickly that family transitioned to the Hohenstaufen family, which is the German family, which is actually the current family in England today. But they're more importantly known for the American Revolution because the first king is going to be King George I, then King George II, then King George III, and most people know more about King George III due to the American Revolution. But the problem is this is a German family. They do not speak English, so obviously that's going to cause some problems between the English subjects and the king. The Parliament actually, through this process, takes more power than they had previously. So Parliament now is fixed to have more power than the king, and Parliament basically runs the country because the German kings really didn't too much care, and they didn't speak English in the first place, so that didn't help. So enlightened absolutism, you don't have an absolute ruler, you have Parliament, and they are putting forth a lot of these Enlightenment ideas, and in fact many of these have been put into place when William the Orange had come in. So the Enlightenment movement in Britain is very successful. It just doesn't take the absolutism route that is being discussed right now. Now, as far as the other states, Prussia, for example, what we have is the king, Frederick II, but he's also known as Frederick the Great. He was greatly influenced by these intellectual thinkers, and he tried to implement many of these ideas into his own state. One of the first things he did was he had a single law code system put into place. one that's going to apply to the nobles as well as the peasants. So that's one victory for the Enlightenment movement right there. He also advocated for religious toleration, and that was put into place in a limited capacity. It was moving in, and it was very difficult in this part of the world to do that. You had quite a few Protestants, but also in some areas you had some Catholics. So there was only limited toleration put into place. It wasn't complete toleration that we might know of today. But the fact that it came in and took hold in a limited fashion in itself is a victory. However, he is going to keep serfdom. Serfdom is where the peasants are going to live on the land. They cannot leave the land. They can marry freely, but they will not leave where they were born, and they're going to do the job that their father had been doing. That's going to be kept into place from this time period onward to a later date. So that isn't a success. But Prussia under Frederick the Great is going to get some Enlightenment movement going on. So as far as absolute enlightenment, it is fairly successful in Prussia. In Austria, on the other hand, we have Joseph II. What he's going to do is he is a strong advocate, and he would be termed as a radical. He is going to try accomplish all the Enlightenment movement ideas. So the first thing he's going to do is he's going to eliminate the serfs. He is also going to have a single law code system as well. But with the elimination of the serfs, now they're all free to move and do whatever they want, and that alienates much of the nobility. And he's also going to be very critical, Joseph II is going to be very critical of the church. And so with this, he actually alienates the church and the nobles. And in fact, the serfs themselves aren't very happy about this change either. It was just far too radical and far too fast for this period of time. They were used to different rules and regulations under serfdom, and now they were free to do whatever, and they weren't getting paid in food, or their livelihood wasn't kept up. And so, in fact, after his death, everything is going to go back to the way things were. So serfdom is going to be put into place once again. And so it's a complete and utter failure, without a doubt, in Austria. And then finally, in Russia, we have Catherine the Great. She is going to be put into place a single law code system as well. She is going to talk about freedom of speech and press and religious toleration. She's going to attempt to change up the government as well to keep it a separation of powers. But that's really as far as it gets. It's basically talk, and it doesn't really go anywhere. And in fact, during her reign, this basically strengthens the landed aristocrats even further. So it is more or less a failure in Russia as well. So it's going to keep serfdom all the way through from the medieval period all the way to 1917 with the Russian Soviet Revolution. So keep that in mind. So for the most part, it seems like Enlightened Absolutism is a failure. And to a point, yes, it is. But it does start to seep in the ideas from France and England throughout the rest of Europe. And they do advocate more education in these countries, even those areas where it failed, for example, Russia and Austria. And this seeps in the ideas that later on is going to lay down the foundation for a lot of these ideas to be put into place and take off. So when you look at these areas today, certainly in the 1900s, even a little bit before that, a lot of these ideas are actually being put into place. It's just going to take a little while for these ideas to spill over into the mainstream. England already has these ideas in place, and this is a large reason why the United States also has these ideas and puts those into place in their own government. They were familiar with them. A lot of these ideas were already still active in England, and they just more or less borrowed the government, the economic system, the religious toleration, freedom of press, and so on and so forth from England. But for the most part, Enlightened Absolutism doesn't make any quick or rapid changes. It's going to take some time, but the fact that these ideas are being filtrated all throughout Europe in itself is a victory. So, there you have it.